Greetings. Welcome to Dr. English's Book Lovers Book Club. I'm Dr. English and I teach English. Today I'm going to review the book um, The Skeleton Tree by Iain Lawrence. I don't have the cover, but I have to say that I really love this book. It was just such a well-written book, and it was such a great story, the story of two boys that get shipwrecked on an island after their sailing trip with their with Chris's Uncle Jack goes awry, and they barely get out. And of course, Chris's Uncle Jack, he doesn't make it. He's trying to save the two boys, and the one boy, Frank, Chris doesn't know him at all, and it's like, who is this kid? He's got long, kind of burly hair, kind of messy hair, and he just doesn't really talk to Chris, and just seems really has a lot of animosity towards Chris. And so Chris is just trying to figure out, who is this Frank kid, and of course he's also mourning the loss of his Uncle Jack, and he's worried that his mom doesn't know where he's at, because he's with his mom as a single mom. And so it reminds me a great deal of Hatchet by Gary Paulson, in that they're lost in a place, and it's kind of a survival kind of a book. And it really does show the dynamics of how two people can make it or not make it in they just want to be able to make fire, because number one, they're cold, and they're trying to figure out how they can do that. And Frank in particular, who's a little bit older, is really frustrated because he keeps trying and trying, and he's not having any luck. And they're basically trying to figure out what they can eat and not eat to survive. The good thing is, I think it was, like, I want to say Seattle, where they left the port, and so there's plenty of salmon. And so they do figure out how to catch salmon. That really helps them stave off hunger and starvation. And they do figure out that they think there's someone there, and that kind of reminds me of Lord of the Flies, how they Simon and Piggy and everybody, they're all trying to figure out, they think there's someone there, that because they see a footprint. And so that becomes part of it too. And just the idea of, like, other creatures, in particular if you're in the Pacific Northwest, it's going to be, there's a possibility for bears. There's, we know that just from our own experiences. So it's a really good, whereas in Hatchet, he's all by himself and has to figure it out. And he has that hatchet, there's always this one thing. And it's kind of like that too. I won't give it any spoilers, but as far as, like, they do have something that they, kept from the boat, and they do come across, some means, and I won't give that spoiler away. But I like, there's this, sense of, like, mystery too, because they're trying to figure out, like, they find a footprint, maybe it was two. And then, like, the other thing is that the whole idea of the skeleton tree, which I thought was a really great motif through this, is that they find this old tree, and there are, like, coffins, which is an allusion to, like, probably indigenous people, like they would put their deceased in trees. And the other thing that plays into this that I absolutely love so very much is there's a raven. And so Chris kind of develops a relationship with this raven, and I just think, and I have been places where a raven, or it's definitely a raven, not a crow, kind of just sat down, kind of just perched right by me. I was in Florida, and it was like I was very aware of the presence of that bird, and I just think, and of course there's the famous poem by Edgar Allan Poe. But if you've been around ravens at all, it's remarkable how smart they are, and it's remarkable how they really do kind of, they can connect with human beings in a way that's pretty extraordinary. And so, and I never thought that was really true until I went to this place in Florida, and it was like this bird just kept, I was there several days, and this bird just kept coming back when he'd see me sitting out, and I was like, okay, there's something to the bird, the raven. And I have indigenous friends, and one in particular who's a birder, and so I think this is a book that is kind of fascinating. It's really kind of a fascinating thing to know that. Sorry, I'm flipping around my my bookmark, and it's just fascinating to know that you can, and all of us really can interact with nature if we just really pay attention. But I love that Lawrence kind of incorporated that into the story of here's Chris. He's this young kid who is worried that, his mom doesn't know what's happened to him, and his uncle has died, drowned in the sea. And Frank is not a nice person to him, and he's like looking for any kind of relationship where he could feel like, that he could talk to somebody. So he talks to the bird. Um, and and there's a book that gets left behind, and it's, I want to say it's like a Norse myth, because it's they have, allusions to Valgard. And so I can't remember the name of the book. It's in here somewhere, but this passage I'm going to share with you has an excerpt from the book, because Frank keeps reading it over and over, or at least Chris reads it over and over, and he thinks Frank's not reading it, but then he'll catch Frank reading it. And so I'm going to read this from The Skeleton Tree by Iain Lawrence. The Skeleton Tree. You can see it on the... So I take the book from the bucket and bend it open. A page falls out, fluttering away like an autumn leaf. It will leave another small hole in the story, something for Frank to argue about. I find my place near the beginning. The Skraelings have murdered Valgard on his farm, and now the man with yellow eyes is running across the fields chasing Valgard's wife and child. Over the meadow that she ran, over the stony slope. On her back bounced Catil, laughing at the game. But this was no game. The man with yellow eyes chased them to the river, where the woman dropped to her knees. Down to her knees she fell, and with her arms shielded little Catil. Please, she begged, please spare the boy. Oh, please. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. With one blow, the Skraeling split her skull. Catil lay beside her, giggling at the sight of his toes sticking up in the air. He tried to touch them and giggled again. The man with yellow eyes washed his sword in the river and left them lying there together in the grass. At dusk, the ravens came. I don't understand why Frank loves this book so much. To me, the best parts are the notes that the cabin guy made. They're scrawled with a red felt pen. True, ravens flock to battlefields. All through the book are similar comments. In his lonely cabin, the man must have become obsessed with the story. He knew a lot about ravens. I keep thinking of Thursday. So that maybe gave a little bit of a spoiler away, but not really. So the other thing that I like to talk about is for my former pre-service teachers about, we had discussions, every week about books that we were reading in our young adult fiction class, young adult literature class. And that was always the question of, would you teach this in high school or middle school? And I think this would be a great book to teach. It's really well written. You could, pair this with the Hatchet if you happen to be teaching Hatchet, because that book is so well known and well beloved. And this was just more contemporary than Hatchet. But you could also, read it, along with Edgar Allan Poe. From my perspective, you could maybe do excerpts from it. I definitely would do this as a small group, kind of thing, whether it's a novel panel, or literature circle or a book club. Because I think kids would, especially, I think middle schoolers in particular would love this book. I think that they would, or upper elementary, fifth and sixth graders, or fifth graders, depends if you have a junior high or middle school. Fifth graders would really like this book. And so I definitely have it on my shelf as a book that you can offer to students who, this might be a genre that they really love. And so, it's just really, I consider, really wholesome in the way that the character of Chris is just, he's just so likable and relatable. And you just really get drawn into his emotions in this book. And I think that Lawrence does a really good job of doing that. And I think, too, the other thing about this is the element of surprise, because at the end, there's maybe some hints to some things in the book, but and it's really hard to surprise me. But I kind of started thinking, I wonder what this is all about. And so at the end, you find out something more about Frank and Chris that I think is really a really good twist, for the reader. And some things that Chris finds out about his family dynamics. And I think all of us have those kind of questions sometimes, like if there's a divorce or whatever in a family, or there's, tension. Oftentimes, we don't know about those things. And then, somewhere along the way, something gets revealed and you're like, oh, yeah, that explains a lot. And I think a lot of kids are looking for that in their own lives. And so in that respect, I really like that part And so I think like middle schoolers would really relate to this, and probably even fourth graders, fifth graders could read this too, and they would love to take it off the shelf and read this book. So I do highly recommend this book. It was a quick read, but I really was engaged with the character of Chris. And Frank too, it's just like I was like annoyed with Frank, and I'm like, I know that like, Lawrence really wanted us to be annoyed with him because that's it was told through Chris's perspective. But I'm going to gift this book to a fifth grader, and I can't wait to give this to the fifth grade boy, who I think will really enjoy it. So I'll see you next week. Thanks for joining. Bye.